So hey guys, this is your favorite the fictional vortex. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto summoned the goddess of moon? But before we start, remember to subscribe and like this video. Now let's start. There was a time when I was all alone, with nowhere to go, and no place to call a home. I had no one to call a friend, no one to call family. But then I met my first friend and only friend. My only friend was a woman in the moon, but even she would sometimes go away. She couldn't stay in the light, but she would always return in the night. With the sweetest smile just to talk to me for a while, but always the light would return and she would go away for another little while. She said, her name was Kagaya and that is what I should call her. But no, I ended up calling her mother for a while. When I first saw her she looked like a fallen angel to me, which wasn't far off from what she truly was. She was truly a goddess of all things. Had taken her interest in me. I wondered why she took an interest in me. She said that it was because I looked lonely. Which I was, oh how I was. But, looking at her, I could see that she too was lonely. So I did what any good child would do. I promised that I would make sure she was never lonely again. She was my first friend, my only family, even if I would only see her in the night. So of course I would try to make sure she wasn't lonely. However, returning home one night I wanted to try something new out. You see, whenever I was at the park, or leaving the academy I'd see the other children hugging their family when they came to pick them up, or friends when they were leaving. So, I tried to hug Kagaya, the goddess in the moon, the one I called my mother. But, I couldn't, I didn't understand. Was I crazy? Was she even real? I had never noticed that we had never had actual contact before. Yet, she calmed me down, and told me that she wasn't really here. Shish, was just a weak genjutsu from the moon. I didn't really know what that meant, but I asked if I could ever actually hug her. I wanted to hug my family, it looked fun, and I never was hugged before really. It was something that friends and family did, and I wanted to do the same. She said, sure, but I would have to do something for her. For even though she was a goddess in the moon, she couldn't truly leave it. For she wasn't a goddess of the moon. Her body and soul was trapped there, cursed to forever watch the earth go round and round yet never set foot on it again. It was why she was lonely. But, if I became strong enough, and followed her directions, that I could break her out of the moon and make sure she was never lonely again. So I made a promise. To make sure she was never alone again. For I was once a child with no ambition, no family, no place to call a true home. But she gave me a route to go down, to gain all those things I had never had. A real family, a place that felt like a real home with her. Thusly, I, Naruto Uzumaki at the ripe old age of 8 made a promise to the goddess trapped in the moon, to make sure she was never lonely again. By breaking her free of her prison. That was also the night where a blood-red moon, with the likening of an eye would shine brightly. With 9 Tomo appearing to be there spinning hypnotically. For it was the day of the Uchiha massacre and many plans were brought to fruition, and others just starting. Waking up the next day after making the promise of his lifetime, one Naruto Uzumaki didn't really know what to do. He goddess in the moon told him that by becoming stronger than anyone else before that he would be able to free her from the moon. But he had no clue how to do so. She had told him that he needed to become stronger than anyone else to release her from her prison. He was still only 8 years of age, having barely started training to become a ninja of his nation, or his village. Beforehand, he didn't really know if he wanted to become a ninja, he just did it because the old man said it would make people respect him. That they would stop bullying him, stop glaring at him. But it never stopped. If anything it became more common. However, he knew one thing, the strongest person in the village was a ninja. A ninja that led his village, the Hokage of Konoha, the old man. So perhaps he should go for that position. If he remembered correctly, from the few teachings he could remember during class, the 4 Hokages were all considered the strongest ninja of their time during their prime. Being the Hokage essentially meant being the strongest person in the world. So perhaps he should try and become Hokage. He would have to ask his Ka-chan later on tonight. He would do anything to break the goddess in the moon out of her prison. even if it required him to do something only a few cold even dream of becoming. Because he had to, it was for his family after all. He would think about it more once at the academy. Maybe the bastard could help him out some. She might have been a cold ice princess, but she was still the strongest in his class by far. Kagaya Otsutsuki did not like many things. For one, she really didn't like being sealed in a moon. It did allow her to call herself a goddess of the moon, but it wasn't her true title. For that was the rabbit goddess. It took her centuries just to find a way to gain some freedom from the pure loneliness, from the seal within the moon that contained her. A seal that if you ever found yourself in you could only describe it as nothingness. Yet, she had garnered herself some form of power outside of it, for even her own son, a man who could call himself a god, could not create a seal that would not degrade in time or had no faults. For time was eternal, and could and would defeat anyone and anything. However, one thing she despised even more than being sealed within the moon, was what her son did to her chakra. It was now an abomination of what it once was. It was supposed to be in the image of a moon rabbit, or of a snow-white rabbit and that alone. Now it was in the form of 9 different beings. 9 new abominations that could be considered as more children in her nursery. She didn't know if she could hate her first son even more than she already did, or love him for giving her 9 more children. It was a conundrum she could not find the answer to love or to hate even more. Yet, looking past the bars, into the cage to this thing's own seal, she decided to change something. For her own seal would limit what she could do, how much she could help her newfound son. For if he were to truly set her free, and allow her to be with him truly in the flesh, he would need all the help he could get and in any form possible. Thusly, Kagaya Otsutsuki, the lonely goddess within the moon, chose to make some drastic changes to her chakra, but most importantly, to her new daughter. And with that, came the shrill screaming of a demon, that could not be heard outside the golden bars that represented the seal that contained it, and would not be heard for the hours it continued on for. With a huff he sat down onto the old wooden swing set, his head resting upon the chain that held it up. It had been a couple hours since academy classes had ended and nearing 2 weeks since the Uchiha had been all but wiped out in their entirety. Naruto had looked for the lone Uchiha in his class the day after before finding out about their untimely demise, and since then had to go the route of training himself with that route cut off. Thus far his progress had been lacking. He needed a teacher, and although he wanted to ask his goddess, his Ka-chan, he felt as if it would slight her if not outright make her leave him. He had not had much success in asking other adults for help. Oftentimes they simply yelled at him, others they became aggressive. He did not want that, could not take that from the one he called Ka-chan. It would break his heart, and he would lose his moon, the light that guiding him on the path in the darkness of night. He knew it was unlikely, and likely him just being stupid. But he would do anything to prevent her from leaving, to become alone again, to let her be alone again. Speaking of which, the last rays of the day were about to dissipate, proclaiming the end of the day. Meaning he would have to run back home quickly, unless he wanted to potentially deal with some of the more unsavory clientele of the Red District. Thusly, with another huff, he rose. Up with sweat slowly drying off, he took off to go home to his apartment. Walking down the streets, towards his apartment so graciously given to him by the Hokage, he saw the once proud Uchiha clan district's gates open, for the first time in ages, and with the yellow tape that once warding everyone off now gone. With that he stopped in front of the large gates, open to the world, just begging him to go in there and find all the secrets it hid. Now came the question, to go in or to not. It wasn't like there would be any ghosts in there, of course not. It wasn't like there was any proof of ghosts existing or anything. Of course, one Naruto Uzumki's hand wasn't shaking like a leaf just at the thought of ghosts. Of course not, which was why he lifted his head high, and turned around away from the compound to start walking slowly away. Hey, Makoto Uchiha was a beautiful woman, if a bit aged. Her pristine black hair she once had lost some of its shine over the years, and her once flawless face now showed signs of age. With crowfeet around her eyes, and slight bags under them. Yet in reality, in total, the signs of age were minimal compared to what most would have. With the death of nearly the entirety of her kin, except her own daughter and son, With the later being responsible for the near extinction of her clan, you would expect signs of age and stress to be far more prominent than what she had. When hearing about Makoto Uchiha's story, you would expect a woman mourning. But she wasn't. Oh no, she was not. If anything, she was happy, happier than she had ever been except for two key moments in the past. The birth of her two children. The reasoning for this: she was free. Finally, at last, she was free from the chains that were her clan. They had shackled her down to her home, to her compound, turning it from being a home to a prison for her. But that was all in the past now, for she was free, much like the fire her clan symbol was meant to fan. Fire was not meant to be caged, it was meant to be free, wild. Looking out the window of her home, freshly cleansed, she released a happy sigh. No longer did the coppery smell of blood cover her home, no longer did clan elders, no longer did old and useless men and women plot constantly. As she watched the fading sun descend below the horizon, casting its last rays over the trees that covered the village hidden in the leaves, she saw a child stand in front of the gate of her and her daughter's compound. The first thing she noticed was the sun-kissed blonde hair, that seemed to shine as if it was its own sun. Notifying her immediately who it was, as no one, not even any Yamenka, had blonde hair so bright. One Naruto Uzumaki, Kushina Uzumaki's son. I wonder what he's doing. She couldn't help ponder aloud. It was odd seeing a little boy just stare blankly at the open gates of her compound. Looking at him for a little while longer, she remembered that he was born just a few months after her own daughter. With that, she arose from her seat by the window. Her daughter had been unresponsive since her beloved, or maybe hated, first son had killed of her cousins in cold blood. She still didn't know whether she would hug him and kiss him in thanks for freeing her, or kill him for putting her daughter through the pain she had been forced to go through. The one small blessing being him letting her live to protect her from the roots of Konoha. Either way, her daughter could use a pick-me-up, and perhaps the blonde child would be capable as just that. Kagaya couldn't help the smile from reaching her lips, one that spoke of both mischief and happiness. It would make anyone of weaker will break down all their mental barriers. It was a smile that could make any man beg to do whatever task needed of them. Yet, Kurama did not trust it one bit. Plus, considering the amount of pain this being had put it just through, made it want to use her as a toothpick through its large jaws. If it could anyway, and with the recent adjustments to its body, it chose just to glare as heatedly as possible at her, throwing as much killing intent as it would if it saw Madara Uchiha again, or even his imposter. None of this seemed to bother her in the least bit. "Ah, are you still mad, my darling Masumi, daughter?" she asked, tilting her head slightly to the left with her smile broadening in amusement. As the deafening silence continued, Kagaya laughed softly to herself. "You know," she began, "I was quite surprised to find out that I had this much control over you," her soft smile turning into something more malicious. "Saddle. Why, I don't have much more time here, Masumi. Using this much power while still sealed may have some consequences on my ability to return to my Sochi," she stated, walking forward slowly until Walking P asked the golden bards that once caged the body of the nine-tailed kitsune. She never even realized that she had stopped throwing her killing intent at the white-haired goddess. Nor did she realize that she was slowly crawling backwards and away with two distinctly human arms from her. The last thing Kurama saw was the third eye that stayed closed throughout their little talk on Kagaya. Otsutsuki's forehead opened for the second time that day. "Hey," that was the first word spoken between one Naruto Uzumaki and Makoto Uchiha. A short, girlish yelp and thud were heard shortly afterward. RDS signifying Naruto's surprise of someone being behind him without his noticing. Naruto could be considered many things, but being perfectly aware of his surroundings was not one of them. It's a skill that all ninja or soldier needed to have. That was something he learned when he first met the current Uchiha head shortly after that. "Hey." Makoto's conversation with the young Uzumaki, whose habit of scratching the back of his head to hide his embarrassment, confirmed his Uzumaki heritage oh so easily for her, with how much it reminded her of the late Kushina Uzumaki, had in all purposes gone well for her. It was saddening to see him run the opposite way of the Uchiha compound, however, despite the somewhat successful conversation she had with the boy. Makoto hadn't been able to convince him to come inside with her. and perhaps even talk with her daughter. But she had been able to get a better read on the child, something you couldn't do from afar, and she liked what she saw in him. He aimed to have a perfect blend of his father and mother. He was somewhat shy and soft-spoken but calculating, much like his father. A reactive planner. And yet he was also brash, and easily excitable, much like his mother. Blending in the two near complete opposites in personality, mixing them into one. Hearing something behind her, Makoto turned around to see her daughter, scowling slightly, looking at her pointedly. "What? Did you say something, honey?" Seeing Satsuki's scowl getting even deeper, Makoto could only scratch behind her head in slight embarrassment of being caught unaware to her own surroundings. Something she had just gotten done talking about to the young boy whose mother she used to talk to on a daily basis, a mother that she feared to see in the afterlife anytime soon. A mother and friend who she had disappointed greatly, no doubt, but circumstances had prevented her from being there. Taking a role that she knew her friend would have done in a heartbeat for her own children if she had passed on. Hopefully she could change that soon. "Sorry, Satsuki. I just saw someone outside the gates and felt like talking to them. Let's go back inside, okay?" Hearing a soft grunt in reply, Makoto sighed. Hopefully she could heal her daughter, who was once so talkative, was becoming more of an introvert day by day. It appeared that her eldest betrayal had hurt her daughter far more than herself. Probably due to not knowing the reasoning behind his betrayal, but that wasn't something she could tell her. No, that was up to her eldest, she thought. She couldn't hold his hand anymore, he had made his decision already. Not that she had held his hand really since he was 7 or 8 years old. Itachi Uchiha had grown far too fast for his own good. Entering the rundown apartment complex that he called home, Naruto huffed slightly, trying to regain his breath, leaning backwards against the now closed door to his home. He had taken the back roads and alleys from the Uchiha compound to his home. The sharp corners that required quick cuts and trash littering around said corners or people provided a good training regime for the child, quickening his reaction times and forcing him to learn how to cut on a dime, or suffer the consequences of running into potential drunks and others that prowl the alleys in the night. Watching her self-appointed son slowly regain his breath in the dim light of his apartment, Kagaya couldn't help the small smile that adorned her face. It was something that would make men weak at their knees, yet it was a pure smile. A smile she had not given in close to a millennium when she first gave birth to her 2 flesh and blood sons. "Sochi, welcome home." Watching the slight jump he made, showing his surprise at hearing her, and then the subsequent beaming smile he gave her once he saw her made her smile just a little bit more. Hopefully he would keep that smile till she returned once more to him. "Ka-chan, you're home," beamed Naruto, but slowly his smile turned into a small frown. "I haven't really been able to make much improvement on my promise though, Ka-chan." He murmured, a slight depressive aura surrounding him. Before he could continue, however, he felt what could only be described as a slight pressure on his being, almost as if he were being hugged. Ka-chan, how?" She didn't say anything, as she just hugged the small child slightly harder. It was the closest thing to physical contact she herself had had in the past millennium, and she was going to enjoy it, and she believed he would need this for his own self-preservation in the near future. "It's okay, my child, and know that I care for you, but I won't be able to visit you again anytime soon after this." She gave a small smile as she saw him looking up at him, despite the shimmering of unshed tears in his eyes, and slowly kissed him upon his forehead, putting more of her limited chakra into the genjutsu that was affecting both Naruto and herself and preventing him from questioning what she meant. "Why?" The half-choked question nearly made her falter in her will. But there was no other way. It was impossible for her to stay any longer for now. "It is simple, my chakra. The genjutsu that this body is simply fading. And thus, for a time I'm going to be gone. But remember this, wherever you go, no matter how far you go, or how long time passes, I will stand by you. You may not see me, nor hear me, but I will be there. Okay?" Seeing his questioning and hurt look linger, Kagaya could only sigh. Stepping back away from him, she asked, "Naruto, you know where I reside, correct?" "What I am a goddess of." "You're from the moon." "The goddess of the moon. My goddess of the moon, you told me that." Naruto mumbled, smiling softly. "And where is the moon every day?" every night Naruto. Seeing his head turn downwards, and despite the bright hair he owned covering his eyes slightly, she could see in his eyes, understanding, and his mind clicking into pieces of the puzzle together and understanding what she meant. So, you will watch me every day. From the moon. Yes, I will be beside you, watching you, following you. You just won't be able to see me for a time. Kagaya smiled, but she was unprepared for quick hug that Naruto attempted to give her, and thus he simply fell through her body in his attempt. Sighing slightly, Kagaya could only hope that Naruto would be fine without her for a while. Her gift to him should be capable of leading him down the correct path for the time that she would be gone, she thought. She could already feel her self-conscious starting to fade slowly, and the pull that the moon always held upon her was becoming stronger than ever once more. She simply didn't have the power to deny her seal's will for any longer, and it would take a few years to gain the power to regain the partial freedom she had enjoyed over the short period she had known Naruto. Sorry Naruto, but I don't have the power left to stay much longer, but let me gift you with one last thing, and close your eyes for a second. Looking towards the pale light that the moon shone upon the world, he could not help but question. Where are you now? Do you see us? Was it all a fantasy? He thought, is it all just a fantasy? He had done many things, killed, plotted, and played, toyed with the lives of thousands, all to get to one key goal. A goal he had been given at birth. Yet, he did not know how to reach that goal at first, nor did he know anything beyond that goal. He did not know the feeling of a mother's touch, or even the touch of wind and water against his skin. He was simply an empty husk given consciousness. He could not feel, physically or emotionally, not truly. When Mother came back in her unstable form, he had thought that things would change. That the winds of time would speed forward and that his goal would be complete soon. That was nearly 50 years ago now, and his biggest piece, most powerful and potential pawn was long dead now. Nearly 15 years gone, and now he had to deal with some upstart emotionally influenced child that was far harder to control. But still controllable, and his goals, the goals of his former pawn, were coming to fruition. He knew that in just a few years everything would finally come to a conclusion. Yet despite not feeling, he could sense things, he could sense nearly anything and everything around the elemental nations. And what he felt made him question what was happening. Mother, what are you doing? Why do you ignore me? And yet I've felt your chakra, even if just barely, on this world again. It was a conundrum for the black and white being. For Zetsu, despite standing in front of his mother's husk of a body just minutes ago, could feel his mother across the elemental nations in Fire Country. Zetsu, it's time to go. Turning, the black and white being, which had a Venus fly-trap extensions enveloping its head and shoulders and wearing the current Akatsuki cloak, saw Obito Uchiha, otherwise known as Tobi or Madara. Nodding slightly, to show his affirmative, he watched Obito disappear into a swirling vortex through the use of Kamui before turning back towards the moon. The child could cause issues to our plan if he continues to act as such, the white portion of Zetsu spoke. Its only response was a narrowing of the golden orb that Black Zetsu called an eye. To be honest, it somewhat regretted merging with the white Zetsu when acting as if it was Madara's will. But it needed to maintain the image it had made for now. He will be good enough for now, let us go and watch him play in Kiri for a little while longer. When Kagaya had told him to close his eyes, he had expected a few things, such as a bowl of ramen being found in her hands when she told him to open them. Maybe a set of kunai or shuriken. These were all physical things, that if he were totally honest he didn't know if she could give, let alone find or use herself. Kagaya Otsutsuki may be graceful and a goddess, but she was obviously untrained to the eyes of the child. So when she told him to open his eyes again, he never in his dreams expected to see golden bars going as high and as far as his cerulean eyes could see. Kagaya quietly giggled into the sleeve that covered her hand, seeing Naruto's dumbfounded expression, but quickly wiped it from her face, seeing that her daughter had disobeyed her orders despite Naruto being unable to see her apparently. What are you doing in that form, child? Hearing the question behind him, Naruto turned to see Kagaya looking up, into what? He had no clue or to whom the question was addressed to. Who are you talking to, Ka-chan? Smiling down at him, Kagaya took a hold of his shoulders and pointed into the gates. "Wait and see, my son." Naruto nodding turned to look before hearing a deep gravely voice respond to his mother and the footsteps of a great beast coming towards him. "Fine, mother." Feeling and seeing a red concussion wave of power come at him, Naruto, wide-eyed, braced himself for an impact before feeling just a slight breath of wind brush by him as the bars of what he could only assume were to cage in this being rang ever so slightly as they stopped the wave completely. With a frown on his face, Naruto turned back towards Kagaya. "Who is that, Ka-san?" "That, my dear, is your sister, and isn't she just gorgeous?" Kagaya told him patiently, pointing back towards the cage once more, her smile widening as her daughter came into view. Naruto himself was struck speechless by the being in front of him who was apparently his sister. For before him wasn't a beast that he had at first suspected but a woman, with blood-red hair cascading down to the middle of her back, a mischievous fanged smile adorning her face, and blood-red horizontally slit eyes with a ring of purple on the outer edges. "Hey Naruto-chan, I'm Kushina and it's nice to meet my Otudo finally." Kagaya, watching Naruto and Kushina interact, felt proud in her decision to give Naruto a Oni-san. The two seemed to interact well enough, and were even playing an odd game hide-and-seek within the alleyways and streets of Konoha that was his mindscape. The very streets and alleyways that had led her to Naruto's dormant mother, something that had been both a great surprise to her and a blessing. With the merging of the Biju and mother, the Y had taken the appearance of Naruto's mother with some slight differences. Kushina's once tomato-red hair had darkened into a blood red, and her once purple eyes had changed to crimson slits with a dark purple edge. They had gained whisker marks much like Naruto's, however they were far more jagged in appearance, giving her a more wild look despite the softness of her face. That combined with her slender yet womanly build made a truly beautiful specimen. All in all, Kagaya was proud of the creation she had made. Albeit, the merging of Kurama and Kushina may have some drawbacks to her Masumi's mindset, and was likely to be prone to personality and mood shifts. She would lead her son into the right direction. The knowledge of a half-a-millennium-old Biju and Jonin-level ninja should be able to teach him and guide him sufficiently till she could gather enough chakra to do more than just watch. With one last glance at a smiling Naruto playing with his new Oni-san, her final gift, Kagaya dispersed from Naruto's mindscape, going back to her moon, to the loneliness that her third son had taken away for a short while. But it is for the better. Falling down into his chair with a sigh, an old man cried silently at what was in front of him. It was something he should have been used to by now. But life wasn't fair. No matter how many times he saw it, it would almost always break him down. "No, my will of fire still strives on," he screamed in his mind, before looking with a determined glint in his eye at the wall of paper in front of him. Paperwork, the one thing that may have been as demanding on his mind and soul as the hundreds, no thousands of deaths he had been informed of from his soldiers as he led them. Hiruzen Sarutobi was an old man, a man that emitted a grandfath early vibe to any and all that were in his presence. His graying hair, that showed very slight signs of it being previously brown, and liver spots screamed his age to the world. Yet despite that, he denied his age and continued on as his village's strongest fighter, and its leader. He was the Sandaime Hokage of Konohagakure. It was a job he shouldn't hold. He thought to himself. He was 60 years old. Almost 30 years past the AVG lifespan of a shinobi, 20 years past his prime. It was a job he would happily hand away, if there was a respectable shinobi able to take the seat. Sadly none were able. Kakashi, once looking so promising, had regressed severely since the Yondaime's reign. Once upon a time he was on the rise to become potentially one of the strongest shinobi in the elemental nations. Now 13-year-old Itachi could probably beat him in a fight. Speaking of Itachi, another child appearing able to take the mantle away from him once more was thrown to the winds with his killing off the majority of the Uchiha clan. "Come in," Hiruzen spoke after hearing a knock at his door, and quickly sent out a pulse to see who it was. Before seeing Iruka Yumino walk in, taking a piece of paper from the stack to his right and studying it, eyeing the man at the corner of his eye, Hiruzen noted the man in front of him seemed nervous and slightly tensed. Perhaps due to the unusual request of his presence. Deciding to let him stew for a little while longer, Hiruzen continued to sign random papers, including some missions requests and reports from the current Jonin senseis. So, Chunin Iruka, Hiruzen began. Looking towards the man in front of him, focusing on the scar across the Chunin's nose for a slight moment before looking into the young man's nervous eyes. Yes, Hokage-sama, do you know why you have been summoned? Hiruzen asked. No, Hokage-sama. Humming in response, Hiruzen turned back to his papers for a brief second, searching before finding the correct one. Well then, this is concerning one. Naruto Uzumaki, a student of yours if I am. Correct. Hiruzen watched Iruka's reaction. He knew that both of them knew that he already knew that Naruto was Iruka's student. But he wanted to see how he reacted. He wanted to know if he could trust this man even in the slightest. He hadn't been able to watch her interact with the child nearly as much as he had wished, but he hoped that with Iruka, he could get a better read on the child, on the Yondaime's secret legacy, on one of his largest mistakes. Hearing the soft sounds of wood scraping upon wood, Satsuki Uchiha awoke slowly, with fluttering onyx eyes to see children piling into the chairs in front of her. She was in the room of her classroom at the Ninja Academy. A place that he had graduated from by the time he was 7, she idly thought. Watching the children slowly piling in, and seeing the laughing, smiling, and happy children enjoying their lives made her feel anger, not that she would ever show, but most of all, it made her feel jealous. Jealous of them for being happy, but most of all, jealous of their ignorance of how cruel the real world is. Of the profession they are going into, ignorance of what the shinobi world is truly like. For she was one of those children just a month ago. She had been smiling, she had been a happy ignorant child of what the horrors the shinobi world had been turned into. But he had taken that away from her. He had ruined everything. Oh, she would get her revenge, she would make him pay for his crimes. He would suffer, and then she didn't know. It made her crazy. It made her want to rip her raven-colored hair out of her head in confusion. In pain, because despite everything, despite hating him, she loved him. Satsuki Uchiha would have never admitted it, no Uchiha would. But she had been a bro-con for one Itachi Uchiha. She loved him more than her father, more than her mother. She had adored him, she wanted to be like him, to make him proud. But now, he had betrayed her family and left all but herself and her mother alone. Now, she was alone, she no longer sat with the other children, preferring to sit in one of the back corners of the room. She no longer had cousins, or fathers, or even a brother to go to after school. She had her mother, oh yes, but her own mother was an enigma to her now. It was as if she didn't even know her. It will get better in time, Masumi, Makoto told her. Look to the future, make a true friend, she said. Her mother didn't even seem upset anymore, and why would she need a friend? They would not help her in her goal. They would not drive away the pain. They would not take away his betrayal. Grunting softly, she looked towards the door to the classroom. The teacher was Ulrea. Delayed by close to half an hour, she thought. Something that hadn't happened yet, considering that the scarred teacher was always here even before her. Hearing the soft clacking of ninja sandals, she watched the doorway until she saw blonde hair enter her view, before turning away. This couldn't be any bigger of a waste of time. Flashback a year ago, atop an old run-down building, up on its roof. Top sat a lone blonde child looking up into the night sky, looking upon the star of the night in wonder. The child, Naruto Uzumaki, with blonde hair as bright as the sun and a smile that could light up any room, could only hold a grim frown on his face. He was a child who wanted for little, because he had, and for the entirety of his life had only ever known of little. Sighing and looking down as a cloud blocked his view from the moon. The child thought of the one thing he truly wanted. A friend, and an end to this loneliness. Looking at every other child, playing with each other or with their parents, where you go. Wherever you see can be the worst. Yea, he had the old man somewhat, if he remembered him and took the time to see him. He wanted to have one person look after him, and go with him wherever he went. That would remember him no matter what happened, that would come and see him whenever they could. He wanted to play with someone, he wanted to rid himself of this loneliness. No, too long ago things had looked a little brighter courtesy of the Fire Shadow, the Hokage and leader of his village. He had been brought to the Ninja Academy, a school to teach kids how to fight, how to kill, but most importantly to Naruto, a place to meet and hopefully befriend kids. The issue though, is that he had yet to make one, let alone find another child willing to spend time with him. Every kid seemed to make a face when looking at him, as if wanting, yet knowing that they shouldn't and thus wouldn't play with him. Naruto could do the math, he may be young but he could see. Walking around the village if he wasn't ignored. Glares and curses were being sent his way through whispers. Yes, he could see the adults hated him for some reason. Their kids were taught to do the same by those people, those adults. Feeling the moonlight once more shining upon his form, with the clouds passing by, Naruto looked up once more, a pang of loneliness hitting home. I wonder if the moon is lonely too, Naruto thought. Yes, it was the star of the night shining brightest, and being the largest object in the sky, but everything else was so far away from even it. I wonder, are you alone just like me? If you are, maybe we be friends, to relieve our loneliness. But then again, you're just the moon, aren't you? There is no goddess or god or angel within you, is there? But if there is that small chance that somebody is in the moon, do you want to be friends, please? Two small moons blinked slowly awake in the cold dark abyss, before a bright light illuminated a small room, littered with scribbling lines zigzagging back and forth, before they all stopped for a split second. The rabid goddess had at last awakened from her slumber. Wherever I go, I will remember you as long as you remember me. Wherever you go, I will see you, and watch over you. So make me proud, so that the next time we meet, I can tell you I'm proud, Naruto. Become strong for me. Those were the last words Kaguya spoke to Naruto, before she had left as he played with his newfound Ne-san. He repeated those words in his head day by day, night by night, making sure he never forgot them. He had even gone as far as asking Kushina to remind him of Kaguya's last words, to remember for him in case he ever forgot them. Because all he wanted to do was make her proud, to make his goddess of the moon, the woman he considered his mother, proud. Staring up at the moon, he hoped that he had done just that so far. Whenever he surpassed his past limits, he could feel her eyes on him, her soul hear him as the winds whispered her sweet words to him, encouraging him to go on to continue growing. So he did just that, continued onwards. No, he strived forwards. Biju Dama. Shit. Fuck. Scrambling backwards. Looking back down from the sky, Naruto Uzumaki could only describe what appeared to be a black hole hurtling his way, clearing all the buildings between him and it with incredible speed as it evaporated everything it touched. Quickly looking towards his right, he swung his right palm towards the nearest building before mentally screaming, Kongafusa. With that, a great chain sprung from his palm, link after bladed link, chattering away as it sped outwards and away from him before the end struck true into the wall of the nearest building. Willing his chains to come back to him, he was pulled away from the destructive ball of death, as it obliterated every last building of Konoha proper in its way before exploding into the Hokage mountain. Panting slightly from the near evaporation, Naruto tried to calm his heart. Naru-chan, you can't be getting distracted on me now, a voice called out, with a playful hint riding the winds that continued to blow from the destructive blast. Looking around, Naruto tried to pinpoint where her voice came from. I would never. Anyway, it's kinda hard to forget about you when you go around throwing literal balls of death at people you know. He shouted out, hoping to draw her out. Hearing a soft thud behind him, Naruto turned around to see Kushina giggling ever so slightly to herself, head tilted to the side as she stood amongst the WRECK that she had made of their playground, tisking and wagging her finger at Naruto. It was a small ball of death and I knew you would avoid it, ya big baby. Putting her finger to her lips, she looked up at the moon much like he had been doing just previously, plus I doubt it would have affected you much considering where we are, Kushina added. Yeah, well, it still isn't all that nice, Naruto responded, before thinking about just where he was. Looking around once more at the great Konohagakure, Naruto hummed in thought, before closing his eyes and concentrating. Kushina, watching this, just waited, before seeing the entire landscape revert back to what it was once before. Broken down buildings, and debris flying into the night sky before reconstructing into what they once were, and coming back. K down to quickly rebuild the village that Naruto called home. The mind was truly a miraculous thing, and seeing how much power the young child in front of her has over his own mindscape was truly awe-inspiring. Shifting through her own memories, as jumbled as they were, she could not remember anyone else capable of doing such a feat, at least not without those eyes. Just the thought of them made her blood boil ever so slightly and her chakra to fluctuate just a bit more wildly than before. Opening his eyes with his job completed, Naruto saw the interesting sight of his sister's hair flowing wildly around her into 9 different directions, taking on the appearance of 9 tails. With her fists gripped tightly as what he could only assume was her trying to burn a hole into the ground with her gaze alone. It appeared that she was in one of those moods again. He could only describe his sister's personality in one way: split. Talking to her, he had come to the conclusion that she was once 2, but was now 1. She said that she could remember being great in size, as large as mountains. Yet also being small as himself. She remembered being a Biju, and also a human. She remembered the name Kurama as well as her own name Kushina. But there were great and large gaps in her memories. Yet the emotions of those memories lost appeared to still be there. He had found. Just the mention of Kumo would set her on edge, and the sight of an Uchiha would take her into this state. Pondering on it for a bit, Naruto decided it was time to call it quits, before leaving his mindscape to sleep. Battling in his mindscape was a truly great way at increasing the speed of which he could react and think. But it also left him drained, and with Kushina in this mood, she would not want to play anymore. So with that, he allowed the darkness to consume him as he closed his eyes, with his last thought hoping that she would not be in the same state by the morrow. Without him, she didn't feel complete, she felt empty. "I think I'm in love," repeated over and over in her head. It could be the only explanation for this feeling. Her own 2 sons, of flesh and blood she never loved, she had had a strong affection for them, yes. But when she wasn't near them, it didn't hurt. When she was away from them, she had never felt this empty. Yes, this had to be love, she mused. It was an odd thought, an odd feeling. It made her feel vulnerable, something she had only felt a few odd times in her life. The most prominent being when her flesh and blood put her in this very damnable mood. Even with her own parents, she never had a strong connection to them. They were simply just there. Just as she was. Just there to her mother and father. She was to be wedded off, to be a princess and prize F. Or another before she had taken fate into her own hands. The man she had used to produce her own flesh and blood had just been a tool, a means to an end. Maybe she had been hoping that with him she would be able to produce the feelings that arose within her when with Naruto. She may have been lonely far before she had been sealed into this moon, she mused before watching, through a crystal ball that she kneeling in front of. Naruto finally leaving the meditative pose she had seen him go into, and get under the sheets of his bed to go to sleep. Seeing him fall to sleep, she could only smile before frowning. Wondering what she should do now. Despite loving to watch over him, she does prefer not just watching a child sleep, even if it is her child. Perhaps it is time to continue looking around, she thought. Before getting up from her present kneeling position and kissing the crystal ball ever so slowly before turning away from it to see the hundreds, if not thousands of other identical balls surrounding her in the circular room she resided in, as the room pulsed to ever so slight blue as the symbols covering her room moved constantly. Reminding her of her imprisonment, of what her firstborn did to her. Watching the ruins as they continued to move, she looked down at all the crystal balls surrounding her. Now let's see what all of the white Zetsu are doing, she thought. Before giving one last glance at the lone crystal ball that rose above all the other, before going into a meditative stance and closing her eyes. Yet, before the darkness could consume her, the ICTING upon the middle of her forehead snapped open, with all the balls around her starting to pulse a dark green. Elsewhere. Mother, you have returned. How? He could feel it resonate within his being. No, not his, but his other half. What is going on? This had to be confirmation. She had been awake. No, she is awake. Standing upon a hill in a small clearing we find a slab of concrete jutting outwards and towards the sky. Upon it appeared to be a list of names nearly covering it in its entirety. In front of it stood a man, with a mask resembling that of a dog, with silver hair jutting out and upwards defying the skies. He wore a black outfit, with his torso protected by a light gray flak jacket, strapped-up sandals and black arms guards reaching up to his elbows. Upon his back laid a tanto held within a white scabbard, a declaration of his familial ties to all that met or knew who his father was. He was in front of what was just one of many similar concrete slabs, far too many in his opinion. It was one of just a few memorial stones of Konohagakure. Memorial stones that gave the name of each and every shinobi that had died in service of its nations, and even those who had died simply of old age. It gave remembrance to all its warriors, its protectors. The man in question was Kakashi Hatake, and he was looking at two names in particular at the moment, Minato and Kushina Uzumaki. With the former sadly never being able to change his name to shout to the public his marriage. "I'm sorry, sensei, but I have failed you," he spoke, looking into the night sky and at the shining moon. It seemed to resonate the same feeling he held within his heart, loneliness. "I can't even remember the last time I have seen your son," he continued aloud. "He does not even know he has a brother, even if not one in blood. But the Hokage has told me that he is removing me from Anbu, to bring me back to the light of day. But I don't know if I can bring myself to the light and see him, the shadows it protects me from the pain." He thought of what the light of day had brought him, and he came up with nothing. He was broken, he knew this. It was why he had gone to Danzo all those years ago immediately after Minato's death. He had hoped the shadows could protect him, and they did. But only to an extent. The shadows lie to you and tempt you. They try to caress you, yet slit your throat the next moment. The shadows were not safe, but in the shadows you are safe from attachments. In the shadows, you could not lose anyone, for you could not gain anyone. The only risk was to lose yourself. Like Orochimaru had, like Danzo had, caressing the names of the man and women he considered his father and mother, he stood up and took off his mask, revealing another mask underneath, covering the bottom portion of his face from the nose down, and a scar going vertically over his closed left eye. Looking at the monument, he ran a finger across the scar, searching for another name, before putting on a forehead protector and angling it to cover his closed left eye. With one last look at the monument, he at last turned to walk away. Perhaps it was time to watch the child of his nightmares. The brother he had, he mused. The brother he threw away, no. The brother he ran away from. Did he even deserve to see his brother? No, was the immediate response that came into his mind. But he would allow himself to complete this one selfish desire. Kakashi was a broken man, he knew this. Hell, he liked it this way, preferred being broken. What was already broken could not be broken again, could it? He thought. Sighing, Kakashi yelled out, "Come on out, Tenzo, cat, I know you two are there." In response to his demand, two people came to kneel before him. Both of them wore the standard Anbu outfits, and wore cat-like masks. With the only differences being that one had 3 red-like stripes on the cheeks and forehead, and the other covered in green and red marking. The one on the appeared to be a man with brown hair and brown eyes, with the other having long flowing purple hair, reaching down to the mid of her back. "Is it true, Taiko?" The male, Tenzo of the two Anbu, asked, searching into the eyes of Kakashi. Kakashi for his part only stared at the two in front of him, at the 2 other remaining members of Team RO. Ignoring the question for a small while, "Taiko," a soft voice spoke out, breaking him from his staring, to see Cat looking at him questioningly. Sighing, and putting on his patented eye smile, Kakashi replied, "It's true, congrats Cat, if all goes well you will become the commanding officer of Team RO. But Taiko, you can." Tenzo started, before Kakashi interrupted. "I can and I have. I was ordered to by the Hokage himself, and I am no longer your Taiko. That should belong to Cat over there now." Kakashi responded with a chipper tone to his voice, hoping to break the tension. He didn't expect this reaction from Tenzo. "You will always be our Taichu. Inu Senpai." Cat spoke up, causing to Kakashi to look at her with a slight widening of his lone visible eye, before closing it and reopening it to show his usual heavily lidded expression. A mask to hide how much that truly affected him. "It's Kakashi now, Cat." He started but was interrupted. "Yugao," Cat spoke up, before continuing, if you ask for us to call you by your name, then you shall call us by ours Taichu. That breaks Anbu protocol, but if you truly want that then okay Yugao, Yamato, now I believe you two have a mission now, no? Kakashi asked, lone eyebrow raised. We can talk again later. Hi Taichu. The two saluted before both leavings in quick smokeless shunshuns. Maybe even in the shadows, he found what he had tried to run away from, a family and friends. Right from the start, he broke his expectations, and he did things he could never understand. He was unorthodox, and you could see something beyond possible in his eyes. It was impossible to explain for a child that could show years of wisdom beyond what should have been capable, and then he would immediately go back to playing, as he called it. His job had seemed so simple at first, an easy mission and payday for simply doing what he would have done anyway. Observe, and teach one Naruto Uzumaki. He was an instructor, a man that was supposed to lay the foundations for his village to strive. It was a job he would have done whether ordered to or not, whether given a mission to or not. Hearing the sounds of pens dropping, and the oh-so-familiar sound of children dropping the IR heads onto wooden tables with the sounds of the groans accompanying them, Iruka Yumino looked up from the papers he was currently looking over to see how the children were doing with their tests. When he had first started this job, he had felt as if the entirety of the Hokage's monument was being put upon his shoulders. And Aburame, Akamichi, Hyuga, Inazuka, Nara, and Yamenka all in his class, L of them clans heirs of the most prestigious and long-standing clans of Konoha. But looking in the back he saw the two children that made even those clans pair in comparison, an Uchiha and Uzumaki. With the Uzumaki being the village's Jinchuriki of all things. He was literally teaching the future of Konoha, the future leaders of his home. It was terrifying to be honest. Even if few knew of the Uzumaki's legacy, everyone knew of the near-distinct Uchihas, and the world would watch those few like hawks, to find out if they were to become prey, or once more the predators. Looking to the back, left of the silent classroom as children scribbled away, he discreetly signaled his companion. How are they doing? Decent, was the reply, but the Uzumaki has done poorly, and the Nara hasn't been awake long enough to answer one question as of yet. Side glancing at the Nara in question, he found the child to be clearly awake and scribbling away at the test. Humming to himself, Iruka pondered if he should go to Shikaku to ask if he had taught Shikamaru Konoha's hand signs. Him awaking right now was quite the coincidence, before looking at Mizuki with a raised brow questioning him on if he saw when the Nara re-awoke. With but a shrug as his response he went to look at the Uzumaki. The Uzumaki that broke his expectations yet confused him entirely. When pertaining history, and even basic information on the elemental nations, he often struggled or failed altogether. It was something that could easily get you killed in the line of duty as a shinobi, as an assassin. Where blending into the crowds, or the average village around the elemental nations, you needed to know their history, how they spoke, their dialects, everything. If you didn't and someone spotted you it could lead to the failure of a mission, or even death. But when it came to strategies he seemed to be unorthodox to the point he didn't know if he was crazy, insane, or a genius. His reaction skills were amazing, his combat prowess showed promise from the little that they were allowed to train in at the academy. Something that had changed with the coming of the fourth Hokage and within their academy. With Hai's gaze lingering for a few seconds more on the Uzumaki, he thought of talking to him after class. Perhaps it was time to get a better relationship with the lone Uzumaki. You do know they are watching you, correct? Spoke up a deep gruff voice. Yes, was the response it received. Do you know why? No, do you? A deep growl was the response. If it had been in her other form it probably would have been a soft hum Naruto must as he spoke to Kushina within his mind. Putting it into the back of his mind, Naruto continued on with this test on history. It was something he despised, it was something he couldn't get help for. At least not from Kushina. Her mind was too jumbled to truly remember much of history, and he usually used the majority of his free time training physically or mentally within his mindscape, rather than reading. Speaking of Kushina, she also happened to be an apparently 50-foot orangish-red fox at the moment. Apparently she had transformed in her anger from the previous night, and didn't exactly want to go back at the moment. From what he had gathered from her mumbled response when he had asked why, it went somewhere along the lines of being able to regain her chakra. Specifically her yin fast in this form. I faintly remember the academy days being more exciting. Her voice spoke up once more as he continued on with his test. Oh, how so? I remember feeling the constant feeling of an adrenaline rush, my heart beating fast, slight pain and the feeling of fulfillment. Kushina described, with her face filled with sharp teeth and blood-red slits for eyes. Tilting her head to the right in remembrance as she stared into the night sky as a clawed finger tapped her lower jaw. It was an odd look to behold, Naruto decided, seeing a 50-foot fox doing all that. Anyway, I think the man will confront you today. Why do you say that? Naruto asked. Call it a hunch, Kushina responded. Any negative emotions? You should be able to tell, so why are you asking? Just making sure. Well then, I'm going to take a nap, Naruto-chan. Wake me up if anything interesting happens, Kushina chirped, not waiting to hear Naruto hum in response. Kushina's hunch had been correct, and Naruto did find himself talking with his teacher Iruka. But it didn't go as he had thought it would, and now, somehow he found himself at a small ramen stand he hadn't been to since before he met her. He didn't even remember the little ramen stand besides a few bits and pieces if he were honest with himself. However, the owners of said stand very obviously still remembered him. Especially considering the young waitress at the stand, a girl just a few years older than himself, had immediately charged up to him and demanded to know where he had been all this time, with her arms folded over her chest and fists clenched. You don't remember me, do you? The girl with large black eyes and fair skin stated, as she stared into his eyes before her own eyes started to blink rapidly as tears attempting to stop the flow of tears escaping her. No, Naruto responded, with a head scratch and slightly guilty look. But I do remember your amazing RGH. That was all he managed to get out. Before the surprisingly strong girl leveled his lower jaw into the cold wood that was the small stand's counter. You baka, how could you forget? She yelled, as he briefly registered the pan now spinning in front of him. The item he assumed he had just been hit with. He blearily watched the girl turn and run into the back of the restaurant with her white robe and blue skirt fluttering behind her as she ran. Why are girls so weird? Naruto mumbled into the cold wood, his speech slurred as his mouth flooded with blood due to biting his own tongue. The soft chuckling of a male beside him reminded Naruto just who he had come to this little stand with. That's a question men have been trying to find the answer to for centuries, Naruto, Iruka chuckled out. Either not no teaching that the question hadn't been directed to him, or not caring and answering either way. Naruto, glancing at him, ignored him. He didn't necessarily want to talk to the man, but he had offered him a free meal. A meal he would be stupid to refuse. Hearing the sounds of soft footsteps coming from the stand, Naruto looked up to see an older man come into view from what was likely the kitchen. The man in question had a white cook's hat on and what appeared to be a jovial smile set onto his aged and tanned face that held many of the same features of the girl that had just hit him on the head. What can I do for you, Iruka, Naruto? He spoke up. And sorry about Ayame, Naruto, she's been worried about you. The cook added, we both have. I haven't seen you in nearly a year, if not longer, my boy. Ayame, I remember that name. Naruto thought. He could catch glimpses of their interactions within his memory, but not much. Just a rare feeling of actual joy and even content when in her presence. Why can't I remember anything else? Quote, shaking his head slightly, he saw the old man snapping his fingers in front of his face. Sorry about that, Naruto spoke up, with a slightly embarrassed expression overcoming his face and his patented head scratch. Quote, so what did you want? You really don't remember us, do you, my boy? The man asked, with a thoughtful expression and furrowed brows. No, that hurts a bit, Naruto, but I was asking you what you wanted to order. The cook added with a smile. My bad, was Naruto's ever so thoughtful response, before glancing at the menu over the older cook's head. I would like a bowl of miso ramen, please. All right, 1 miso ramen and 1 shio ramen coming up. Watching the old man walk into the back, he turned his head to see Iruka giving him an inquisitive stare, with his right eyebrow arched as if silently questioning him. After the short stare off and realizing that Naruto wouldn't answer the unasked question. Unless voiced Iruka started off their conversation. So, you don't remember Tsuki or his daughter Naruto? Iruka asked. No I don't sensei, at least not much. But you have been here before. Do you remember much about being at the stand? Some, but you didn't invite me here to talk about this ramen stand or its owners, did you, sensei? Naruto asked, staring at the older man, wondering what he wanted. At first he had been fine with just playing it slowly, but not remembering them was grating on his nerves. Iruka just hummed in response, seeing the chef coming in with their orders. Orders up, boys, Tsuki stated with a grand smile, before giving an expectant look to the two. Naruto, seeing Iruka ignore his question to break his chopsticks in two and beginning to eat, stated a simple, "Itadakimasu," before digging in himself. His first bite brought Naruto's senses to new heights, his taste buds exploding in flavor, and forcing his nose to inhale the orgasmic sense that was Ichiraku ramen. His eyes widened in surprise at how truly amazing this piece of art was. It's good, isn't it? Iruka asked, only to be ignored by a shouting Naruto asking for a second and third bowl to be GHT up before he had even finished the first. A half an hour later, 9 empty bowls sat in front of the blonde child. He wanted to weep for his lost money. The child apparently was a glutton when it came to the food. Or art, as he called it under his breath. So do you remember me now, Naruto? Tsuki asked with glee in his tone, and a glint in his eyes as his eyes followed Iruka's DS as he pulled out the bills to pay for their meal. Nope, was Naruto's response. Oh, yeah, well then. Tsuki paused, eyeing Naruto for a second before turning to Iruka. Well, will that be all, Iruka? Tsuki asked. Yay, that will be all. Iruka nodded to the man, before turning around on the stool to see that dusk was fast approaching. Turning to the boy he had just fed, Iruka pondered how he should restart their talk. So, Naruto, Iruka started, before trailing off, waiting for the boy to respond, to show he was listening. Yes, sensei, I was wondering if you would want to go too, he started. Before being interrupted by a soft sigh from the boy. Please, sensei, can you please just ask your questions? Whatever they are, here and now, asked the clearly tiring child. Very well then, what is a ninja, Naruto? Naruto simply blinked rapidly in response, not expecting that question before responding with a resounding, huh. On your last test, not the one today but before, there was a question asking what a ninja is. Iruka began. You said a ninja is someone who is strong, and well, that was it, he stated, glancing at the boy in front of him. Tilting his head to the right, Naruto just rubbed the back of his head in response to give himself a few seconds to think over his response. Well, I guess I will stand by my first response, Naruto responded with an awkward laugh. Looking away from the boy as they stood in front of the ramen stand, hearing the clattering of dishes showcasing Tsuki cleaning up his shop before closing, Iruka stared off at the sunset that was beginning. Well, it isn't exactly an incorrect answer, Naruto, but I hope you understand there is a lot more to that. Iruka stated. Well, sure, but I don't need any of the other stuff, Datbeo. Naruto responded, before turning to the man. After glancing towards the moon. Anyway, it was fun sense, but it's getting late, he said before turning to go home. Wait, what do you mean you don't need any of that other stuff, Naruto? Without it, you can and likely will die in the field if you ever are made a ninja. An image of her face appeared in his mind's eye, but he couldn't tell him about her, so he decided the most simple answer. Because that's what the Hokage is, the strongest person, the strongest ninja, a person that is strong, in mind and body. True, but it requires a lot more than just that, Naruto. It's not just flashy jutsus and straight-up taijutsu fights, the ninja world isn't that black and white. Do you understand that, Naruto? Sure, sensei. Can I go home now? Sighing, Iruka just looked at him before looking at the Hokage's monument. Yay, just keep in mind what I said, okay, Naruto. Not hearing a response, he turned around to look at Naruto before seeing him gone. Well, that could have gone better, Iruka thought, staring intently at the fourth's head, before shaking his head, or it could have gone worse. snapping shut his oh-so-beautiful, masterful piece of art that was his precious. Kakashi's lone eye moved away from its pages to follow the small blonde running the opposite way from him. Currently he was sitting upon the rooftop opposite the ramen stand, and had been simply observing Naruto. It was something that had become somewhat of a pastime for him besides his usual reading habits in the past weeks, as he found out quickly that a life outside of an BU was far less time-consuming than had at first remembered. Getting up slowly, he observed the lone Anbu assigned to follow the boy for the time being. Crow, if he remembered correctly, was the most likely culprit, as she appeared to request the mission the most whenever it was available. Seeing the long brunette-colored hair flowing as what appeared to be a female's body moving from shadow to shadow atop the rooftops to follow the boy somewhat confirmed his suspicions on who would be following him. Crow was an interesting mystery for him when he was Anbu, being someone that was handpicked by Hiruzen Sarutobi was an honor few held, yet her appearance had come out of the blue, plus her assets interested him. Maybe that was actually why he took an interest in the female Anbu member, he pondered. Such assets were hard to come by, and rare to not notice. To see them and not correlate them with a member of the Shinobi Corps was an oddity. It was how he usually identified the new female Anbu members. Shaking his head to put those thoughts on the back burner, he jumped down before the Chunin instructor could walk away himself. Maybe he could help him find something of interest for his brother. "Kushina, you awake?" Naruto asked, as he nudged her apparently sleeping form ever so slightly. A cute moan was his reply, before she turned away from him, digging further into the white sheets that covered her form and burrowing further into her pillow. "Kushina, come on and wake up, it's time to train." Naruto tried again, before trying to pull the pillow away from her apparent iron-tight grip. "Just give me a little more time to sleep, Tsunade." Tsunade? Who's that Ne-san? Naruto thought, before looking back down at his sister, hearing a soft groan and felt a slight gust of wind hit him from nowhere. The hell was that? Quote. He gave a thoughtful frown, looking at his sister, before tugging on the pillow again, before a bright red pulse of what he assumed to be her chakra emitted from her. And another soft breath of wind rattled through the room, moving the curtains that kept what little light from the outside from entering the room. Looking at her curiously, he was going to try again before a second and third pulse emitted. Wah! Pain throttled through his skull as Naruto rolled around. Ow, 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 he moaned as he held his throbbing head. Ah, for fuck's sakes. Why does this keep happening, Datbane? Blinking back to awareness and crawling up to his arms to stand on slightly wobbling legs, Naruto coughed slightly as he saw the dust cloud formed by his sister's apparent transformation back into her nine-tails form. Said transformation also happened to have destroyed the half of the building that they had been residing in, as well as the room he had just been trying to awake her in. Looking behind him, he found a peculiar indent within the wall that looked far too similar to his own body to be simple coincidence. Seeing a small smear of blood, where the indent of what he could only assume had been the cause of the throbbing that was his head, he reached back behind him to feel a sticky and wet substance upon his hand. Pulling his hand in front of him, to see the red stain of blood, he shook his head slightly before breathing out slowly, and letting the wall reform back to what it once was. Hearing the clattering of wood and stone ending, signifying that the building had seemed to settle down, Naruto decided to jump outside towards the form of the nine-tailed fox. "You okay, Ne-san?" Naruto called out before stepping back slightly. What he saw frightened him, seeing cold, dark blood-red eyes filled with hate glaring at him. They weren't his sister's eyes, they didn't shine like hers usual did. She looked to be about to swipe at him, before Kushina shook her head and a purple edge came back to her eyes. Shaking it off as him seeing things, he looked up at her to see her shrinking ever so slowly back into her human form. Humming softly, as she shook out her limbs, and feeling herself in the far more comfortable body, Kushina looked at Naruto, then to the building that she had just been soundly sleeping in. "I told you not to wake me up if I'm asleep, Naruto-kun. You should learn from this," with a nod at him and another hum as she seemed to drift off into thought. Naruto could only balk at her, with his jaw hanging open, but, "Wah, how is this my?" Stuttering, he couldn't come to a response, before shaking his head again, trying to get rid of the still slightly ringing in his inner ear. "Forget it," he said, rubbing his aching head just a bit. Before finally feeling the ringing leaving, head injuries even in his own mindscape appeared to be a bit debilitating. "Sue," he drawled, looking at her intently now, regaining her attention. "Who's?" "Tsunade, Tsunade." Nodding, "Tsunade," he replied, only to gain a blank gaze from her in response. "I don't know." "Oh, yup, time to train," Naruto asked, coming back to why he had come to the mindscape in the first place. "Sure," Kushina chirped, before rushing him and punching the boy in the face, sending him flying back into the wall he had just fixed, putting another indent into. Why? Turning around with an arm thrusting out, she had 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 soft thuds all hitting home. Before turning around in a whirlwind of raven-haired low CKS and deep sea blue cloths to do the same with the other arm thrusting out, and having 5 very similar soft thuds showcasing her hitting her targets. Opening her onyx eyes with small beads of sweat rolling down her porcelain skin. She stared at the 5 targets in front of her, counting 5 bull's-eye, before glancing at the others behind her and counting the same. It wasn't enough. Itachi could do hundreds at once. She was the best kunoichi in the class, the academy even. But it wasn't enough. She had applied for early graduation already, and yet had been denied. 9-year-olds. For as long as I continue to reign as Hokage, will never see the field of battle again. Children will not see the field of battle, the Sandaime had told her. Her mother had even told her to just wait. Wait. For what? She seethed. For him to come finish the job. She had replied. Satsuki Uchiha had expected a hurt look, anything but her response. You aren't ready to be a genin. How am I not ready? She roared, splintering the dummy in front of her with a kick, before reverse kicking it out of the ground to explode onto a tree nearby. Something along the line of mental stability and blah blah. Blah had been both of their responses, her mother, the Hokage they all just didn't understand. All she knew was that she needed to grow stronger, and the academy wouldn't give her that. It was a waste of time. Her mother had gone as far as refusing to continue her training, not until she had completed a promise that she had given to her. A promise to befriend some lazy blonde boy that no one even talked to. Not that she talked to anyone either, but that was besides the point. No one was worthy, strong enough for her to waste her time on in the academy. Shaking her head, about to rid herself of thoughts on the academy, she scowled slightly, before gathering her hair and putting it back into the spiky ponytail it had been in before her training had begun after diner. She dived back into her training, before eventually falling asleep, under the moonlight in the grassy meadow that was the old Uchiha training ground. Satsuki would awake, as normal in her bedroom, ONC. More not realizing that she had never returned to it the night before. The end. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.